foxtail?
Well, the short answer is enjoy them, because we don't do a very good job of killing them. Although these are one we can do a lot for easily, and that's the Buttercup. I got to tell a Buttercup story. My wife has a friend who's one of the best photographers I've ever seen in my life. She likes to take pictures of plants with color. Her two favorite ones are musk thistle and that beautiful purple colored flower, and these buttercups. And so she, when Facebook stuff out, and so there's this great picture of a couple of thoroughbreds out in a horse pasture, and it's, you know, it would not be very high on your scoring list because it's mostly yellow like that one. And people were saying, oh, what a beautiful pasture. Well, I made some nasty comment about the quality of that pasture. And so my wife, being the docile person she is, really, put on that and said, this is a very poor quality pasture because that's not very good for feed. And lo and behold, here come about a half a dozen more saying, yeah, this is a terrible pasture. Don't be putting this on Facebook and saying it's good. So my comment made a little bit of progress, but I noticed that she's still putting up more pictures of her past stuff. But buttercups are something that I don't know what to say about it other than the fact it is a beautiful plant. Also, I write notes down now, Marcoma, because my memory is not what it once was. Crabgrass. For those of you, particularly a bunch of agents in the back, smooth crabgrass. I know you should have seen this, and most of the one we have we call hairy crabgrass or tall, got a lot of hairs on it. I've seen more smooth crabgrass this year than I have the previous 40 years combined. Anybody else notice that knows the difference on them? I don't know why. They're just there. And I have to say I noticed them more in row crop fields than I did pastures, but I'm just curious about that. Also, we've talked about nimble numerous times that I've been at this, and I was at the very first one. Anybody else in here besides me and Debbie that were at the first ones? Very first one? You guys were there, huh? 2007, you think, or 8? Time flies. Nimble, just a little history. I'm not the only weed scientist that hasn't been able to come up with a control for nimble. The first one research that I found in 1965, there was a master's thesis on trying to control nimble with herbicides. Utter failure. So I've got 38 and a half years of utter failure too. And whoever the people that take my place or have taken my place, they don't even work on it because they know, I guess they figured out that there's nothing to do with it. But there is one thing to get rid of nimble. If you're willing to go tall fescue. Nimble does not do well in tall fescue pastures. And there's a lot of reasons for not using tall fescue, and they've been talked about, particularly from a broodmare standpoint. And so at any rate, it just does not compete well with tall fescue. So that's one way to really limit nimble. On the other hand, be careful where you put those horses. That's a big deal. I'm not saying it's not. And one of these novel endophyte tall fescues, I guess it's the Lacefield is I think the one, and we looked at two of it, and it is equally as good as old Kentucky 31 tall fescue inhibiting nimble growth. So that's, if you don't need that for, if it's not an issue with breeding animals, then that's one way to limit it. I won't say it's going to get rid of all of it, but there won't be much there. So with all that said, and nobody helped me out on my crabgrass question. So we're going to talk about two weeds. Buttercup, there's not an excuse for having buttercups in your pastures. There's at least a half a dozen herbicides that kill it just dead. Spray something. And everything I say from here on will just be emphasizing that a little bit. I'm going to talk about some herbicide names and rates. Don't get too worked up. There's publications that have all this information in them. I didn't bring my copy of AGR 182, which is the big pasture weed control one. I don't know if it's any back there or not, but there's one that you can get online at that website that has all the herbicides for all pasture situations. For anybody that's ever, challenges of pasture weed control. Well, in any pasture in this state, you can find 25 plus species and not even work hard at it. It's just easy. We're in a transition zone. We're at the southern end of the northern zone. That's your Canada thistle, some of the other things that we have. We're at the northern end of southern zone, Johnson grass, crabgrass, although it's pretty much everywhere. There's no one practice you're going to do or no one herbicide is going to solve your problem. That just does not happen. Overgrazing contributes to the occurrence of weeds. And all of these farms where you've got 1 acre, 10 acres, or 2,000 acres, you face all of these on farm size. The biggest surprise to me when I started doing horse pasture work was finding out that these massive farms with 1,000 or 2 acres have problems with overgrazing. I couldn't figure that out. Well, they do. So it doesn't make much difference on size. J.D. Green, extension weed scientist here at UK, and has talked to this group before. He did a survey on pasture and hayfield weeds with the Ag and Natural Resource agents, the ones that are here. So if you don't like what's on these slides, go blame your county extension A&R agent here, not me. I'm just reporting data. But there's a couple of things on here. I just saw this and thought it was worth talking about. Problematic weeds. Well, what heads the list here? 73% had Buttercup. That's based on they were asked to put the 5 most problematic weeds in their county. And so the 1 heads the list, and the yellow foxtail is down here to the bottom. So how many of those weeds, if you know them, are typically in horse pastures? A simpler way is how many are not horse pasture weeds? And I only can really think of about 2. You don't see much tall ironweed, and this was for just all pastures, not in hayfields, not just horse pastures. You don't see much tall ironweed in these horse farms. And that's primarily, I think, for mowing as much as anything. Rarely see much horse nettle. And these 2 you see, but not very often. So here are the weeds that we're interested in, and I think, the people that asked me to talk about Buttercup and yellow foxtail, that's why. So here's what I found really interesting. Why are you thinking about controlling weeds? Well, they reduce forage yield and carrying capacity. That's true in many pastures, but not near all of them, because you don't have that many weeds. Aesthetics, they look good, look better. That's why we mow a whole lot of farms. Concerned about poisonous plants. How many can name 1 poisonous plant in horse farms? Somebody? Extension agents, speak up. I know you know. Pales and hemlock, far and away the most toxic one we got. When should you spray poison hemlock? 5 months ago. It was up, ready to go. It's up, donates in the fall. It's a biennial. So that's really the most toxic one we deal with. And it's not to say that there are not others, but clearly it is the most common and most toxic. And remove weeds that animals do not eat. How many plants do you have on your horse pasture that animals do not eat? Or Smith? We have garlic. What? We have garlic on our pasture. Garlics, yeah, they won't eat that. Nimble reel is one. Somebody else? Good something? Spiny amaranth? They only eat one part of that plant. Does anybody know what they eat? Well, they snip out of the top of it. The male flower. Not the seeds are not in that. So if you've heard about spreading weed seeds through manure of animals eating those top flowers, those are no seeds in that flower. Those are just the male flowers. So they're great. And yellow foxtail. They don't eat that much either. So why are weeds not controlled? This is the part I found really interesting. Low management. Maybe. Don't want to kill the clover. I heard that everywhere I go. That's why I like working on horse farms. They don't care if I kill their clover. Beef farms want no part of that. Herbicides too expensive. I can't answer that. I don't think they are. I grew up on a farm pulling weeds and hoeing weeds, and they're a lot cheaper than hand labor. Spray equipment limitations, that may well be true in places. Lack of time, that certainly is part of it. Topography, steep terrain, etc., limits that. And that is a bit of a problem in much of Kentucky, in central Kentucky. Because these hillsides, and you're trying to spray with a big boom and you hang it. Has anybody ever seen a 50-foot boom hung into a tree in a horse pasture? I have seen that twice. They weren't real happy. Neither the owner or the applicator, I might add. Too expensive for mowing. Mowing is expensive. Then you don't ever put together just what it costs to mow. I see projections all over from $20 to $40 an acre to mow. I have no idea what that answer is. And grazing restrictions with herbicides. The 5% who answered that, you're not paying attention to what we publish. There are no grazing restrictions on herbicides for horses or beef cattle, only lactating dairy cattle. Now, some people will tell me, I don't want to put my horse in the day I spray. I don't care if you put it in there 1 day, 6 weeks, 6 months. That's up to you. Legally, you don't have to take them out of the pasture. That's your call. And I can't convince you other one way or the other, nor do I try. That's your call, whatever you feel comfortable with. And if that's not using any herbicides, that's fine. But if you want to get rid of some of these, you don't have much choice. So with all that said, I want to talk about 3 herbicides that we have. One's a new herbicide, the others are older ones. This material called Duracor, we're going to talk about it. It's very similar to Grazon next, and the next slide I'll show you why. Plateau, I have given 2 or 3 talks or more on using Plateau to kill tall fescue out of orchard grass and bluegrass fields. Facet is the newest one of the bunch, and this is broadleaf control. These are for grass control. And we'll see some of that data in just a minute. So, when was that picture taken? What do you think? Front? 28 hours ago. That's kind of what some pastures look like right now, because you see a little bit of green in there and you see some all sorts of dead plants and what have you. The point I want to make is right now is if you get out and get on your hands and knees, whoops, that's what you see. Does anybody can tell me what that plant is right there? And that plant and that plant, that's Buttercup yesterday. So we know that we can spray Buttercup for, and they've been, some of those have probably been up since October, November. They come at real, when soil temperature gets right, they germinate. So that allows us this huge amount of time to, if you're going to use herbicides, to go out here and attack buttercups. You don't have to wait, and you don't want to wait till that yellow flower's up there. You want to do it now. What's the problem with getting out there right now? What? Mud. It's certainly wet. You don't see a whole lot of grass in there. There's more grass in there than that. I've kind of found a bare spot so I can get a good picture of that buttercup. But the bigger problem is just timing, because you've got to get, how many in here do their own spraying? If you're going to spray, how many do one? A few, 10 maybe. And how many get it done by your local applicator who you buy your products from? That's more often than not the case. But, and they will tell you the biggest problem is if they've got 10,000 acres of buttercup land and they have got a week to do it, that doesn't equate very well when it's dry enough. And so that's one of the things that I want to hit a little bit of it when we talk about Buttercup. Now here, first of all, this is not all the herbicides that will kill Buttercup, okay? If you look in the publications, you'll find about that many more. These are the ones that I think, if you're just going to go for Buttercup, you know, 2,4-D amine, 2,4-D ester at a quart rate, $7. These are estimated prices of the herbicide and the surfactant, $7.50 to $9 on 2,4-D. Which one's better, amine or ester? If it's real cold, cool February time frame, your ester will get more in the plant. The control at the end of the year is going to be about the same. They're going to be very good to excellent. We're talking about 90+% control and approaching 100%. Those are quite good. Grazon next is another one, 1.5 pints. Now the rate range on these is much more than these ones. One thing, when I give talks, I don't like to give rate ranges. I give you what I think is the best rate based on data and my experience over the last many years of spraying pastures. 1.5 pints with surfactant, excellent control, about $15. Duracor is a fairly new product, and I'll show you the difference between these two. They have the same active ingredient, and again, excellent control. So why would anybody want to use these compared to those because of doubling in the price? Well, it's not the only, remember I said you've got about 25 weeds out here? Those aren't the only ones that are just out there. These two have an active ingredient, I'll show you in a minute, that will persist in the soil and control germinating seedling weeds. Things like spiny amaranth, potential, some of those. So you have to decide, what are you really going for here? The soil life of 2,4-D in the soil is about 7 days or a rain, and it's gone. It does not persist in the soil at these rates. These two, on the other hand, will persist for months at some rate. Now, how much is depending on how much you put out there to start with. So I'm going to talk about Duracor and Grazon. Duracors, and again, these are big names, I understand that. Aminopyrrolid, and I can't even pronounce that fluroxyphene very well. Aminopyrrolid and 2,4-D. And these two, this aminopyrrolid, persist in the soil. And that's a good thing. You want herbicides that persist in the soil up to a point in time, as long as they don't cause problems with your succeeding crop. We talk about clover killing. You won't find anything better for killing clover than that product right there. It's as good as I've ever seen. I mean, it's just deadly on clover. We put these out in water. These are just label comments. Weed control is similar. If you want clover in your pasture, do not use these, period. If you want any other broadleaf plant out there, don't use that. These things have problems with manure management practices for, well, I said all two here. It persists in manure for months, and do not use manure for composting or on gardens or other croplands or whatever, because they will stick around. Now, the good part of that persistence is that if you spray it out here for clover or for Buttercup now, you will get some persistence and some control of any number of weeds that might germinate early in the spring or early summer. Like the pigweed's not particularly early, but it will be around to give you some control of that. It won't do it every year, but when it does work, it's great to get rid of spiny pigweed. If you can't figure out what you're going to do with your manure management, then do not use these products. Just simple. We've had enough trouble with people getting horse farm muck, putting it into composting, and things dying the next year. So again, I think these are one of the best things that's happened to weed control in Horse Pastures has been this introduction of aminopyrrolid and 2,4-D. Superb weed control we've seen. On the other hand, you've got to make sure you know what you're doing with your buck. And they have strict requirements and guidelines on their label. I'm not going to go into all that, but basically, if you're going to move an animal that's been consuming hay or grass forages with these materials, before you move it to another site, you need to put it for 3 days, isolate it for 3 days before you move it on and get that manure spread somewhere else as it leaves the animal. So it takes about 3 days for this to go through a horse's digestive system, what it amounts to. So again, there's a whole bunch of more herbicides that you can use on those. So I'm going to move on to plateau and talk about this one. Historically, we've used it for tall fescue control. It's labeled for yellow foxtail, and it does a fairly good job, actually. 4 to 6 ounces per acre of the plateau, and then you need to use methylated seed oils at 1.5 to 2 pints per acre. And 4 inches or less, and 1 inch is better. How close do you have to be to a 1-inch yellow foxtail plant in your pasture to see it? If you're standing looking down there, you might. If it's a good pasture, it's very difficult to see. So you have to get down there. And the reason that I say the 4 to 6, 4 ounces really will take care of this problem. But as Dr. Smith said, everything is not perfect. And there will be, when you think you're spraying some 4-inch or less, you'll be spraying some 6-inch plants out there. If you can stand at the edge of your field and see yellow foxtail, they're a whole lot bigger than 4 inches. That's the problem. One of the things that would help really mow it as low as you think you can tolerate it in early May to early June when these are out there. These are really easier to take care of in hayfields than there are pastures. But that's basically what we're talking about here. This methylated seed oil, that's not a surfactant. That's a very specific adjuvant that is developed for plateau and other herbicides in that family. So it is important to use that if you want to get good control. Facet's an old product that's been around in the turf market for years, lawns, for crabgrass control. Is rice and rangeland for many perennial weeds. And we have limited research on this in Kentucky pastures, unfortunately. That's got put on the label and nobody at UK or maybe anywhere else even knew about it. And so we're behind, trying to play catch up. So here are the products for yellow foxtail. Facet and plateau you spray after the foxtail is emerged. Prowl H2O, 2 quart per acre, mid-April to early May, good control, about 7.5. This is one that I wish we could time better. We know that your yellow foxtail is going to germinate when the soil temperature gets to about 65 degrees. And the problem is we don't know when 65 degrees on the soil surface is. All the weather data has soil temperature at 2 inches and 4 inches. Useless data. When that foxtail seed is going to germinate in the top 1/4 inch to top 1/2 inch. So we don't have, and that basically mimics air temperature more than it does anything else. So I wish we had a specific date, and we did some work with this trying to look at from around the 1st of April to mid-May, and that's just the ballpark area when it occurs. Use at least 2 quarts, don't use less, to get that control. The plateau, again, I talked about 4 ounces at less than 4 inches. The facet at 2 quarts per acre and 2 inches or less. And if you've looked at this other column over here, 750, 16, 44. So how many are going to jump out and go spray Facet real quick? Well, I did put it out this year. And no grazing restrictions for any of these products. You got a 7-day after harvest before you harvest for hay. I don't get that either. Your horse could eat it the day of and hay 7 days later. So anyway, those are the products we're dealing with. Again, this is one that has to go on before germination, and these two have to go on fairly small weeds. And for anybody who wants to try Facet, 2 inches is small. I mean, and if you're going to be putting that kind of money out, make sure you're not spraying a 4-inch weed, because that's probably going to be money down the drain. And this is not just for yellow foxtail as this 2-inch, pretty much across the board in all annual grasses where it's used in rice. I don't know how, I hope you can see that blue line I put in there. Over here, well, let's start with this one. See that yellow looking thing there? What's that? That's yellow foxtail. Over here's where Plateau was sprayed. Real obvious. And so it's not that this product works pretty good, but you have to, again, get out there on the small weeds. And this was in 2020, so where I'd sprayed a field and left an area in here, whereas my neighbor accused me of not being able to see or drive straight. I actually left that on purpose. It was about my first effort of looking at Plateau there. So, you know, that really was impressive to me. And so we know we can get decent control of that. I sprayed the Facet in 2021, and somewhere or other my pictures have evaporated out of my system. So I don't know where that is, but what I did want to point out, this is what, if you go in and spray Plateau and you find, here is the dead and dying yellow foxtail right here. Slow acting. Don't go out 2 days later and expect to see it. It's just real slow, but it eventually does die. And so I had well over 90% control in this field, which has a orchard and some fescue in it. So we know these things work, but it is something that we have to pay a lot of attention to get them to work well. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about drift management a little bit. Be careful. This is a great picture, actually, because you don't see anything coming out of here. That's water and spray, that's herbicide coming out of that field. Actually, it's Grazon next coming out on this paddock. And so you don't see anything. That's a good thing. But just to re-emphasize, heed restrictions. They vary widely in comments on spray volume per acre, wind speed, pressure, and distance to other crops. I know of one instance where there is one herbicide label, do not spray within 250 feet of sensitive crops. And they sprayed along a vineyard, and they were 100 feet away, and they knocked the stuffings out of 2 rows of grapes. And so that lawsuit has been dragging on since 2018 and trying to decide who's buying what. So be careful with that. The other thing is, are these nearby crops yours or your neighbor's? That's really important if you're doing your own spraying. Make sure what's next to these, if you're dealing with a sensitive crop, what are sensitive crops? Grapes, soybean, tomato, tobacco, flowers, greenhouses. Yes, we had a drift into a greenhouse once. That was hard work on a helicopter pilot to do that. They're easily noted. Almost all of these pasture herbicides we've talked about, with the exception of prowl, you don't have any trouble telling where you have hit a plant. They call wrinkling, crinkling of the leaves, they strap. Very, very noticeable. All of them do that. So make sure you're careful with that. And as I always say, small drops travel a lot further than big drops. So if you're spraying yourself and in the area where you know there are other sensitive plants nearby, make sure you're keeping the distance and you're using all the pressures and nozzle types that they talk about. And I think, time for questions.